The first time I saw them on our porch, without calling, without texting, without even knocking, I should have known this house wasn't truly ours yet. Judith smiled like she owned the sky above it, and Douglas walked in like the ground was his. That was day 2. Not even 48 hours after Elliot and I moved into our new place in Boulder. It was supposed to be our beginning, a soft reset after a messy wedding season, long debates about cities, and a rented apartment above a motorcycle garage that never quite felt like home. This 3-bedroom, mid-century fixer-upper was our chance to breathe. Quiet, clean, ours. Or so I thought. Judith didn't even wait for me to speak. She walked straight past the threshold, her eyes scanning every inch of the living room like she was checking in on a guest suite. "We brought you a little something," she said, pressing a bottle of cheap Cabernet into my hand. "Something for the first night." Douglas followed, clutching a folded stack of papers, some maintenance tips he printed off from a home blog. I hadn't asked. I didn't need them. But that was the Renshaw way. Assume incompetence, mask it as love. I tried to stay polite, smiled, nodded. I even thanked them. But when Judith plopped herself onto the couch like it was a throne and crossed her legs with ease, I felt the shift. The air tensed. "So," she said casually, "when do we get our spare key?" I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" Douglas chuckled like I'd asked if water was wet. "Oh, sweetheart, of course we need one. You never know what could happen." "In case of what exactly?" I asked, voice even, heart already pounding. Judith leaned forward, all saccharine and scrutiny. "Well, what if something goes wrong while you two are at work? What if we need to water the plants or check on things? Just little stuff, really. You know, for emergencies." But there was no emergency. No plants that needed watering. No request for help. This wasn't kindness, this was control. I turned toward Elliot, my husband, my partner, the man who, not long ago, had promised to protect me, to stand beside me, to build a life with me. He didn't look at me. He nodded instead. "Yeah, that makes sense." Then he pulled the extra key from the dish by the door and handed it to his mother. I felt something snap inside me. Something quiet, like a rubber band, pulled too far. I smiled. Too sweetly. "Of course," I said. "You're absolutely right." My hand itched to snatch the key back, to say no, to shout, but I didn't. Not yet. Because this wasn't a fight I was going to win in that moment. Not with Elliot still caught in their gravity. Not with Judith staring at me, like a queen bestowing favor. I nodded once more. "It's good to know we have backup." That night, while Elliot showered, I sat at the kitchen table staring at that key dish. The one that was now 1 copy lighter. The weight of it wasn't just metal. It was history, habit, legacy. Elliot had grown up in a house where Judith decided what meals were cooked, where Douglas inspected report cards like military files. Elliot never rebelled. He just adapted. I'd seen it in subtle ways, his hesitance to disagree, his need to ask for permission instead of forgiveness. He wasn't weak. He was trained, but I wasn't. So I began to plan. By morning, I'd already bought a secondary lock, hotel-style, thick, steel, the kind that could only be latched from the inside. By lunch, I was reviewing indoor camera systems. And by nightfall, I had texted someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Uncle Frank. He replied within minutes, "I'll bring my duffel." This wasn't just about a key. This was about setting the tone for the rest of my marriage, for my home, my life. And if I had to teach them what the word boundaries meant, I was ready. I just needed 1 week. I played my role to perfection, the agreeable daughter-in-law, the sweet, understanding newlywed. For the next 7 days, I said all the right things. I thanked Judith for watching over us. I laughed when Douglas made passive-aggressive jokes about homeownership. I even said things like, "It's actually kind of comforting knowing you two are nearby." Judith beamed. Douglas smirked. Elliot relaxed. That was the part that hurt the most. But while they floated in the illusion of control, I was working. Quietly, relentlessly. Step 1, I installed the secondary lock, a heavy-duty hotel-style latch positioned discreetly at the top of the door, out of sight unless you were looking for it, only accessible from the inside. Elliot noticed, of course. "You really think we need that?" he asked. I just smiled. "It's bolder. You never know." Step 2. I set up the motion-activated security camera in the living room. It was sleek, tucked behind a bookshelf connected to my phone. Every movement, every sound, every intrusion sent straight to me. Step 3. Frank. Frank Delaney wasn't technically family. He was my mom's cousin, once removed. Former Boulder PD. Retired early after an on-the-job injury. He ran a private security firm now, but still had that look, broad shoulders, buzz cut, sharp eyes that had seen too much. He was also the only person I knew who could go toe-to-toe with someone like Douglas and enjoy it. When I called, I didn't even have to explain. Just said, "It's about a boundary that doesn't exist." And he said, "When do I move in?" We made it legal. I drew up a short-term sublease and filed it with the landlord, who didn't bat an eye. Frank would stay 1 week. Enough time to see if Douglas and Judith truly believed their key gave them full access. Elliot, of course, wasn't told. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I didn't trust his conditioning. Not yet. I didn't have to wait long. It was Tuesday morning, 10:41 a.m. I was at the office when my phone buzzed. Motion detected, living room. I opened the feed. There they were. Douglas was already in the kitchen, opening cabinets, inspecting drawers like he was checking for contraband. Judith was smoothing the throw blanket on the couch, then casually walking toward the hallway like she owned it. I watched, jaw tight, heart pounding, as she stepped into our bedroom. Seconds later, she reappeared with a basket of clean laundry and started folding it. My stomach turned, not out of shame, out of fury. The audacity, the entitlement. This wasn't help. This wasn't love. This was judgment disguised as caretaking. Supervision dressed as generosity. They didn't think they were doing anything wrong because in their world, I wasn't really an adult. I was just the wife. I watched as Douglas walked back to the door, ready to leave. He turned the knob. Nothing. He turned it again. Still locked. Judith joined him, confused. Douglas rattled the handle harder, then looked up and saw it, the extra lock. He blinked, pulled harder. Judith's face paled, and that's when the basement door creaked open. Frank stepped into the room like he'd been waiting for this moment all his life. 6'2", worn denim, black t-shirt stretched over broad shoulders, his arms tattooed in ink he designed himself. He cracked his knuckles, leaned against the wall, and smiled like a lion who just found 2 confused deer in his den. "Well," he said, "look who let themselves in." Judith gasped, stumbling backward. Douglas puffed up. "Who the hell are you?" Frank didn't flinch. "I live here." "You most certainly do not," Judith stammered. Frank reached into his back pocket, pulled out a folded document, and held it up like a badge. "Signed sublease. Registered with the landlord. You just broke into an occupied residence." Douglas took a step forward, but his voice cracked. "This is my son's house." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Not this week it isn't." And I watched it all from my desk. Calm, cold, completely in control. The trap had snapped shut, and they never even saw it coming. Frank didn't move from the wall. He didn't have to. His presence was enough to turn the air sharp. Douglas was fuming now, his cheeks blotchy with heat, his fists clenched at his sides. "You're trespassing," he barked, voice hoarse with disbelief. "Get out of our house." Frank actually chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sounded more amused than threatened. "Your house," he repeated, raising one thick eyebrow. Then he calmly unfolded the lease again, slower this time, savoring every second like a man peeling the skin off someone else's lie. "Signed, notarized, filed. You can call the landlord if you like, but I'd suggest doing it from outside." Judith clutched Douglas's arm, her voice trembling. "Douglas, let's just go, please." But Douglas wasn't finished. "Where's Claire?" he demanded, ignoring her. "She'll explain this. She's not involved in this ridiculous game." Frank leaned back, crossed his arms. "She's at work, where normal people are on a Tuesday morning." That was when my phone rang. "Incoming call, Elliot." I took a breath before answering. "Hey," I said casually. "What the hell is going on?" he blurted out before I could say anything else. "My parents just called. They said there's some guy in the house claiming he lives there." I smiled, staring at my screen. "Really? Maybe you should ask them what they were doing inside our house in the first place." Silence, then a soft, almost broken whisper. "Claire, did you do something?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He hung up. Back at the house, Frank stayed cool. Douglas was pacing now, muttering under his breath. Judith kept darting glances toward the door like she was hoping someone, maybe Elliot, would appear and rescue them. Frank, meanwhile, poured himself a glass of water from the kitchen, took a slow sip, and said, "You know, if you wanted to borrow sugar, there's a better way to ask." They didn't laugh. It took another 10 minutes before I walked in. I took my time getting there. I parked 2 houses down, walked up the driveway deliberately, keys jingling in my pocket. When I opened the door and stepped inside, the room felt electrified. Judith was perched on the edge of the couch like she'd been caught stealing from a church. Douglas stood by the door, his eyes sharp dark. Frank nodded at me once, the only greeting I needed. "Hey, babe," I said cheerfully, dropping my bag on the counter. "What's going on?" Douglas stepped forward, shaking the lease in my face. "This is a joke," he snapped. This is a lie. You're playing games." I tilted my head, calm as ever. Funny, the landlord didn't think so. Judith finally stood up, her voice sharp and shaking. "You think this is cute? Locking us in here like criminals? This little stunt of yours? You've gone too far." I folded my arms. "Too far? You mean like walking into our house without permission? Going through my kitchen drawers? Folding my laundry?" Douglas's voice dropped low and dangerous. "We have a key." Frank snorted. "Yeah, and look how well that worked out." At that, Elliot finally walked through the door. He stopped cold. The whole room froze. His eyes darted from me to his parents, to Frank. He looked like a man stepping into a burning building, knowing the fire started long before he got there. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. Judith rushed to him, grabbing his hands, her voice laced with betrayal. "Elliot, did you know about this?" Her eyes searched his face like she could pull truth out of hesitation. He froze. She gasped. "You did," she breathed. "You let her do this?" Elliot rubbed his face, exhausted. "Mom." But Douglas had reached his limit. "I want the key back," he barked. "Right now." I didn't flinch. "No, we're your family," he hissed. "We have a right to be here." I actually laughed. "Do you hear yourself? You don't live here. You don't pay the mortgage. You don't get a say." Douglas took a step closer. "You're making a big mistake." Frank cracked his knuckles. "I'd love to see how that plays out." Douglas turned toward him, furious. "You shut your mouth," but Frank just grinned. That slow, dangerous kind of grin that makes grown men reconsider. "I don't think I will." Judith tugged his arm. "Let's just go." Douglas wouldn't budge. His voice dropped to a cold, venom-laced promise. "You're going to regret this." I met his gaze without blinking. "No, Douglas, you are." And I meant every word. That night, the silence between us was almost louder than the shouting earlier. Elliot and I sat on the couch like strangers. He stared at the floor, elbows on knees, fingers laced together so tightly they were turning white. The only sound was the soft hum of the fridge and the distant creak of the wind moving through the pine trees outside. I waited, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I wanted to hear what he would say first. Finally, he spoke, So, are they going to hate you forever now? I exhaled slowly. Probably. He nodded, eyes still fixed on the floor. I really screwed up, huh? I didn't answer right away. I wanted to. God, I wanted to scream. To shake him and ask how he could hand over a key to people who had never once respected me. But instead, I said, "You gave them a key to our house, without even asking me." He flinched just a little. You thought what? I cut in, keeping my tone low. That they'd respect the boundary? That they'd only come in when it was convenient? You know them better than that, Elliot. You grew up with them. He rubbed his temples. I get it now. Okay, I messed up. I really thought they just wanted to help. No, they wanted control, I said quietly. And you handed it to them. He looked up at me, and for the first time that day I saw it, shame. Real, raw shame. Not the kind that fades with an apology, but the kind that lingers. The kind that forces you to question everything you've been taught about love, family, obedience. We're changing the locks, I said. He didn't argue, just nodded. Over the next few days, things went quiet. No calls. No surprise visits. I almost let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd finally understood. That the message had landed. But deep down, I knew better. People like Douglas and Judith didn't back down. They regrouped. They recalculated. And sure enough, Friday morning, my phone rang. It was our landlord. Hey, he said, voice unusually stiff. I just got a strange call from some people claiming to be your in-laws. I felt my stomach drop. What kind of call? They were fishing, asking if there was any way to terminate your lease early. I went cold. They what? They offered to pay out the remainder of your contract. In full. Said they'd like to take over the unit themselves. I had to grip the edge of the kitchen counter to steady myself. Did they say why? He hesitated. Something about restoring the house to the right hands. I didn't get the full picture. But don't worry. I told them no way in hell. I hung up and stared at the wall, vision blurring with disbelief. This wasn't about concern. It wasn't about parenting. This was war. They had actually tried to evict us from our own home, as if I were some unwanted tenant in a life they believed belonged solely to their son. I didn't tell Elliot. Not yet. Not because I was hiding it, but because I wasn't sure he was strong enough to face the truth. Not all at once. He was still wading through years of guilt, shame, and invisible chains. He had finally stood beside me once. But could he do it again if the war escalated? So I made a decision. I got in my car, drove straight to Douglas and Judith's house, and rang the doorbell like I belonged there. Judith answered, wearing a surprised smile that quickly curdled when she saw it was me, not her son. Oh, she said stiffly. We weren't expecting you. No, is Milat. I figured. I stepped inside before she could say another word. Douglas was in the living room, beer in hand, legs kicked up like he didn't have a care in the world. He barely looked up. What do you want? He grunted. I sat down across from him, folded my hands neatly and said it plain. I know what you did. Judith stiffened behind me. Excuse me. You tried to get us evicted. Douglas slowly set his beer down. I don't know what you're talking about. I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen. Should I put the landlord on speaker? Silence. Then Douglas had the audacity to smirk. All right, he said, leaning forward. Let's say we did. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I let his smirk sit in the air like smoke from a slow-burning fire. Judith gasped beside him. Douglas, she hissed, what are you saying? He waved her off like her panic was a fly. She's not stupid, Judy. She already knows. Might as well own it. His voice was so casual, so calm, it made my skin crawl. Like trying to ruin your son's life was just Tuesday. So what was the plan? I asked, leaning back slightly. Get us evicted, take over the lease, move in, and pretend nothing happened? Douglas tilted his head. We just wanted to be closer to our son. I let out a short, bitter laugh. No, you wanted control. You always have. You didn't care if it wrecked his marriage, his mental health, or his stability, as long as he stayed small enough for you to manage. Judith's hands wrung together, trembling. Claire, you're twisting this. We were just trying to help. Elliot's always needed a little extra guidance. He's not 12. I snapped. He's a grown man with a home and a wife, and you're treating him like a broken appliance that needs checking every week. Douglas's face hardened. We raised him. He wouldn't even have that house without us. No, I said, voice ice cold. He wouldn't have a lifetime of self-doubt without you. He wouldn't freeze every time someone asks him to make a decision. He wouldn't apologize for existing in his own space. Judith's lips parted in shock, but I wasn't done. You didn't raise a man. You raised an obedient echo. Douglas stood abruptly, the coffee table rattling beneath his knee. Watch your mouth. I rose to match him. No, you watch yours. If you ever, and I mean ever, pull something like this again, I will make sure you regret it. Not just in this neighborhood. Not just with the landlord. I will expose you for what you are, a manipulative, abusive father who can't let go of the one person he thinks he owns. Judith's voice cracked. Are you threatening us? I smiled, but it wasn't warm. Oh, Judith, I haven't even started. And then I walked out, not one step faster than I needed to. I wanted them to watch me leave. I wanted them to know, truly know, that they weren't untouchable anymore. For a while, I thought that might be enough. The silence that followed was almost hopeful. No calls, no emails, no unexpected cars parked across the street. I started sleeping better. Elliot did too. He didn't ask where I went that day, and I didn't offer. But something shifted in the way he looked at me, like he saw a line drawn behind my eyes, and realized I was the one willing to defend both of us when he couldn't. But the peace didn't last. It started small. A missing Amazon package. A trash bin knocked over in the middle of the night. Minor things. Things you could explain away. Until one night, Elliot and I were curled up on the couch watching reruns, the lights low, the curtains half drawn, and we heard it. A scraping sound. Metallic. Slow. Coming from the front porch. Elliot muted the TV, eyes narrowing. Did you hear that? I nodded, already moving toward the door. He peeked through the peephole and stiffened. What is it? I whispered. His voice was flat. Cold. My dad. I looked through the peephole myself. Douglas stood on our porch, holding something in his hand. A key. Not just any key, one of the old ones. The ones we had changed. He turned it in the lock, nothing. Again, still nothing. Then he pounded on the door with his fist. Open the damn door. Elliot stood frozen. His face wasn't anger or fear. It was grief. I pulled out my phone and hit record. Douglas, I said through the door, voice calm, controlled, firm. You need to leave. This is my son's house, he yelled. No, I said. It's not. Not anymore. And just when I thought the moment couldn't get more surreal, Judith's voice rang out from the side of the house. Elliot, sweetheart, she pleaded, her voice syrupy with desperation. Just open the door so we can talk. But Elliot didn't move, and for the first time, I think he realized this wasn't a family visit. This was a siege. Elliot's breath came shallow and fast. He was staring through the peephole, but he wasn't really seeing. Not his father, not the porch. Just a lifetime of commands that sounded like concern. 100 small decisions he never got to make. A boy raised on approval like oxygen, suddenly realizing he didn't need to keep breathing in poison. Elliot, I whispered, what do you want to do? He didn't answer. Douglas banged on the door again, harder this time. You are making a huge mistake. His voice cracked with fury. Then the motion sensor lights in the backyard flicked on. I turned to the back window, just in time to see a shadow move near the fence. Someone was back there. My body moved before my brain caught up. I grabbed my phone and called 911. Stay inside, the dispatcher said. Officers are on their way. Douglas was still hammering the door. Open up. You hear me? You open this damn door right now. I know you're in there. Judith was crying now, her voice floating in from the side window. Elliot, please. You don't mean this. You can't let her do this to us. I saw Elliot blink hard, his whole body tensed like a coiled wire ready to snap. I reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. A minute later, red and blue lights washed over the front of the house. The banging stopped. I opened the door slowly, holding my phone in one hand, still recording. The two officers stepped forward. One tall and serious, the other younger but alert. Douglas turned toward them, arms raised like he was the victim. This is just a misunderstanding, he said quickly. I'm his father. We're trying to talk to our son. That's all. One of the officers looked at Elliot. Sir, do you know these individuals? Elliot's jaw worked silently for a moment. His eyes flicked from me to Douglas, to Judith's tear-streaked face. And then he exhaled. They're my parents, he said slowly, and they're trespassing. Judith gasped. Douglas's face drained of color, his mouth slack in disbelief. The younger officer stepped forward. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you both to step away from the property. Douglas didn't move. His hands curled into fists. You think you're doing the right thing, he said to Elliot, voice low and dangerous. But you're going to wake up one day and realize she took everything from you. Elliot didn't speak, just looked at the officers. Judith stumbled toward the porch, her hands clasped together like in prayer. Elliot, honey, please don't let her take you away from us. You're our son. You'll always be. But Elliot cut her off. Quietly, firmly. She didn't take anything. His voice cracked, but not from weakness, from resolve. You did that. You did that when you stopped seeing me as a person and started treating me like an extension of your will. That's when Douglas snapped. You're not my son. He spat the words like they burned his throat. Then he turned sharply and stormed down the porch. Judith stayed frozen for a moment, sobbing silently before chasing after him. They didn't look back. The officers waited until they disappeared into the dark, then turned to us. Do you want to press charges? Elliot shook his head. Not tonight. We closed the door. The silence afterward felt like a cavern, wide, hollow, echoing with everything that had just happened. Elliot sat down slowly on the couch, his head in his hands. I didn't say anything. I just sat beside him. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, voice barely above a whisper, he said, They hate me now. I swallowed hard. Maybe. No, he said, shaking his head. They do. My dad, he meant it. I saw it in his face. I didn't deny it. Yeah, he did. His hands balled into fists. I don't know how to feel. I reached for him again, this time not just to offer comfort, but to anchor him. I know. He looked at me with tears swimming in his eyes, then dropped his head onto my shoulder like a child who finally stopped pretending everything was fine. I think I always knew this was coming. I didn't speak, because deep down, I did too. The days that followed felt strange. Not quiet, because quiet had peace in it, but hollow, like the aftermath of a storm that no one really believed would come. Elliot didn't talk much. He moved slower, like every step had to push against a lifetime of obedience. I gave him space. I made tea. I kept the lights soft and the house warm. I didn't say, "You did the right thing." I didn't need to. Some truths don't need repetition. They just need time to settle. And then, 5 days after that night, it happened. Elliot was checking his email over breakfast. I was pouring coffee when I heard his breath catch. I turned. What is it? He didn't speak, just turned the screen toward me. It was from a law office. Subject: cease and desist interference in parental relationship. The letter was formal. Cold. worded with the sterile precision of people who knew they had already lost in real life, so they turned to paper to try and reclaim control. They're demanding that I restore communication to its natural and expected state, Elliot read aloud. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even surprised. It was just numb. I scanned the page. They had cited emotional alienation, intentional separation, and withholding of familial affection. It was absurd, ridiculous even, but underneath the legal jargon, I saw it for what it was. Desperation. They're trying to legally force you to talk to them, I murmured. Elliot laughed, short and dry. Yeah, looks like it. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the screen like it held the final puzzle piece of something he had been trying to understand his whole life. And maybe it did, because after a long pause he smiled. Not a big smile, not one for me, just a small, inward curve of the mouth, like something had finally clicked into place. They're desperate, he said quietly. I tilted my head. You're sure? He nodded. Yeah, I'm sure. And then, without another word, he opened a blank email, typed a single line, and hit send. Do not contact us again. We blocked everything after that. Emails, numbers, social media accounts. Judith tried with fake names. Douglas sent a Christmas card addressed to E. Renshaw and housemate. It went straight into the trash, but the attempt slowed. Eventually they stopped, and in that stillness we healed, not all at once, not cleanly. Some nights, Elliot would wake up drenched in sweat, murmuring fragments of old memories. Some days he'd stare too long at a photo of him as a child in Judith's arms, trying to reconcile what was real and what was rehearsed. But time has a way of softening even the deepest scars, if you stop picking at them. One evening, weeks later, we sat on the porch. The sky was pink with dusk, the neighborhood hushed in that golden lull before dinner. Elliot held a mug of tea in both hands. His shoulders weren't hunched anymore. I feel free, he said softly. I turned to look at him. You are. He let out a long breath, then with the faintest laugh added, So, can we invite Uncle Frank over? I think he's earned a beer. I smiled, finally letting myself exhale the fear I hadn't even realized I was holding. That night, we didn't talk about trauma. We didn't dissect the past. We just sat, two people who had chosen each other, against the odds, against the expectations, against the weight of inherited guilt. Sometimes people say family is forever, but that's not true. Real family doesn't chain you. Real family doesn't punish you for growing. Real family doesn't make you feel like you owe them your life. Sometimes the bravest, kindest, most loving thing you can do is walk away and never look back.